All right, so I was going to spend the first couple of minutes telling you about who I am, but I decided what I really want to tell you is that I'm the records officer for the Bureau of Reclamation. And it's odd that a records officer would be driving the kind of enterprise and software that we're talking about in developing the Internet of Things. But in our organization, the engineering staff is not as motivated as I am, and I have some control issues, so I want to see this data produced earlier in the process so that we can manage it more effectively. The other thing I want you to understand is, yesterday we heard from Renault, and they talked about having a product replacement cycle of 2 weeks. Many of the pieces of equipment that we deal with in reclamation has a 50-year replacement cycle. So our ability to implement new technology is affected by that replacement cycle. And the only thing about me I will tell you is that I've been with reclamation for over 30 years, and I've worked in virtually every office that they have. I want to tell you a little bit about who we are not. If you're from the western part of the United States, you probably thought I said Bureau of Land Management. The Bureau of Land Management deals with dirt, land. The Bureau of Reclamation deals with water. And it's our water that makes their land worth having. Reclamation began during the western bound phase of our exploration in the United States. Inadequate precipitation in the American West required farmers to use irrigation methods in order to provide the crops to support their families. Mark Twain once said that whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. And that is demonstrated very well in the American history books and is still demonstrated today in the court litigation cases that are being filed between states over water rights and the amount of water that's delivered at state lines and country boundaries. Settlers really simply wanted a way to preserve the early spring runoff from rain and snowmelt and then use that water later in the growing season when it was more needed. And in 1902, Congress passed legislation creating reclamation. The Reclamation Act let us begin to do the things that we're most well known for, and that's building dams, power plants, and canals constructed in the 17 western states of the United States. Reclamation has constructed more than 600 dams and reservoirs, including Hoover Dam on the Colorado River, and Grand Coulee on the Columbia River. Today, we are the largest wholesaler of water in the country. We bring water to more than 31 million people and provide 1 out of 5 Western families with irrigation water to irrigate more than 10 million acres, providing more than 60% of this nation's vegetables and 25% of their fruits and nuts. I just like this picture a lot, so I threw it in there. This is an early picture of an irrigated field, and while this predates my childhood, I can remember some childhood scenes that look very much like this. Reclamation is also the second largest producer of power in the United States. Our 53 power plants annually produce more than 40 billion kilowatt hours of electricity and produce enough electricity to power 3.5 million homes. It also generates $1 billion in power revenues that offset our costs within reclamation, and the balance goes to the National Treasury to offset national debt. Today, reclamation is a contemporary water resource agency. We have numerous programs and initiatives to preserve water, to support our customers, the states, Native American tribes, and others. We place great emphasis on fulfilling the water obligations and conservation related to recycling and reuse of water, the developing of partnerships with customer states, Native American tribes, and finding ways to build together with a variety of interests to address the existing and competing water needs in the West. And if you wonder about that value, if you think about the city of Las Vegas, pro or con, that city would not exist if reclamation had not built Hoover Dam. In 1999, we began looking for a records solution, a drawing management tool. And for one of the first times in our history at reclamation, I think our objectives, our goals, were ahead of the industry. And we ended up selecting a number of individual software pieces that came from different companies at that time that were all supposed to work together, and our management bought off on this idea that all these pieces were just going to mysteriously work together seamlessly. And what happened were some of the pieces of software we had selected were actually being bought up by competitors and other companies. So by the time we could actually deploy 7 years later in 2006, we had to reconfigure the implementation, and we pieced together what we could from the original procurements. And frankly, what we ended up with was something that just did not meet any of the original objectives and ended up being nothing more than a simple repository for finished work. To replace this failing system, we began to look at the software industry in about 2012, 2013. And we started looking at how we're going to replace this system. And we looked at the software industry and we tried to figure out what they were capable of, how they were going to be able to meet the needs that we had identified, and what more we were going to need in order to meet the objectives that we had. After a very lengthy procurement process, we selected Blucello Meridian Enterprise as our solution of choice. When we purchase software or services from a vendor, we don't tend to think, at least from my perspective, as that relationship with the vendor being a customer-vendor relationship. We think of that as being a partnership. So we expected them to share our goals and our objectives and to work with us to achieve those. And they have done that very, very well. What we ended up developing was a wheel and spoke configuration, which was not consistent with our own Department of Interior policies, which were centralize and consolidate. And quite honestly, some of the things we were trying to accomplish were really at the edges of what the Meridian Enterprise solution could offer for us. So again, the partnership comes into play, and we worked with them to develop the software in a way that would make sense and support our needs. Each of these spokes represent an office in reclamation where significant activity takes place, drawings activity, engineering activity. And each of these individual spokes then have other offices that are connected to them. So what we ended up with was kind of a wheel-in-a-wheel approach. And every night, all of those 16 sites are supposed to update their data to that central location. So in the central location is housed all of the drawing information for the Bureau of Reclamation, and it's easily accessible to anyone within the entire organization to search the entire database. We have some latency issues in some of our remote locations, and we're working on our infrastructure to overcome those. And we're also working with our partner, Blucello, to take advantage of the tools within the software, and in some cases to improve those tools so they work more efficiently, not only for us, but for others who will be using them as well. One of the problems we encountered was that we had some offices that had done some in-house, homegrown document management systems that housed, in at least one case, hundreds of thousands of documents. And when we tried uploading those, it kind of bogged down the system and created some issues for us. We're working again with our partner Blucello to find alternate methods of getting that data updated to the central location. And then once that backlog of information is updated, we don't anticipate any problems with the day-to-day activities being able to be handled. Sorry. Somewhere about halfway across my 40s, my memory went to someplace I can't remember where to find it, so I have to have notes. So Reclamation is an organization of more than 9,000 employees spread across the 17 western states. Many of our offices are located in some of the most remote locations in the lower 48 states. Progress within Reclamation is slow, but it can be measured. Reclamation estimates that we have about 10 million engineering drawings that we're trying to manage. And that covers the 113 plus years that we've been in existence. So we manage dams. And a dam like Hoover Dam, for example, has a life expectancy of 300 to 500 years. That life expectancy is based on how long it's going to take that reservoir to fill up with dirt. The concrete will be there for thousands of years. And someday, Hoover Dam will be a beautiful waterfall that we will all be able to visit. But law mandates that we maintain every drawing that's created that's related to that facility for the entire life of the facility. So that's why we have 10 million drawings. And that number will continue to grow as those facilities exist. Our previous drawing management system, which was mostly a failure, had 330,000 records in it. In the last 18 months or so since the implementation of the Blue Cello Meridian Enterprise product, we now have over 2 million documents in that system. So about 20% of the total is what we're estimating. And that number continues to grow on a daily basis. Some of the things that we learned along the way was that acceptance of a product is directly related to the quality of the training that is offered. Our original training effort was a train-the-trainer approach. And quite honestly, that failed miserably because each trainer took something different away from that training, and so we were getting less than consistent results. Our second effort was to send 2 people to each of the 16 satellite locations and do the training. This approach was very consistent and provided a quality result. It built user acceptance and support and was very effective, but the cost was higher. Second, we discovered that to address user-identified issues immediately. I was amazed at how one individual in a very remote location could create or be an obstacle to progress or promote progress just by providing support. So basically, better support to those end users early on results in better success of the product implementation. Again, we ran into some problems associated with those one-off systems that offices had built. Most of them, they didn't tell us they had them because they had installed them against policy by the Department of Interior. So they didn't want to share the fact that they had those. And so it was quite a surprise, and it created some issues for us. But again, we're working to resolve those. Finally, our installation was technically commercial off the shelf, but it is highly configured for our business practices and processes. The upgrades are more complicated than we had expected, and we're partnering more with our vendor as we do additional upgrades. The first one was kind of painful. There were 3 things that I would suggest if you're going to look at implementing any sort of system you consider. Take your time building the requirements. Don't involve just IT and or management. Involve the end users. Build grassroots support. Again, leverage the energetic and knowledgeable users who embrace technology as your champions for the people. And then third, build management support and write the policies that demonstrate management support, and write them for them so you can get them in place early in the process. We see what we've accomplished to date as simply the stepping stone for where we want to go next. NASA never talks about failures. They talk about early attempts at success. Some of our early attempts at success were more successful than others. But we wouldn't have made any progress if we hadn't suffered through those struggles of the early attempts at success, because we learned so much from those. Reclamation is currently looking at what our next early attempt at success is going to be, and that's the Maximo integration with our Meridian Blucello products. Linking the two systems will give real-time access to the most recent and current data that we have available. And in many cases for us, that's a matter of life safety in the field. Remember that about 80% of our total drawings are still in paper form. And engineers will be working in a regional office, for example, on a work order for maintenance. But the drawings in the field at the site might be different than what the engineer has because they're all paper. And again, that increases our risk. Moving to a fully integrated electronic process will reduce that risk factor for us significantly. Again, right now we're in the grassroots building support phase of that, and we're working with management to identify budget for the implementation of the Maximo integration. This phase of the project should bring the digital information into focus for those field crews. With the data now at their fingertips, they should be able to kind of connect the dots between the digital and the electronic world, or the paper and the electronic world. The integration between Maximo and Meridian will allow more efficient and cost-effective management of our 53 power plants and more than 600 facilities. And again, this step is simply building grassroots support. Long-term goals include the integration between digital information and the physical world. We currently have a number of systems that are connected and provide static updates or updates to static conditions in the field. Water flowing into a reservoir, water flowing out, precipitation, those sorts of things. But these are all static connections or static information that is reflected and manually sorted and managed and used to make decisions at our facilities related to flood control and other things. The nice thing would be if those sensors were much more self-aware. And the future where that's possible is really just around the corner. We can see a time and a place where equipment is not only aware of itself, but of its surroundings and other components. Where a pump knows that an O-ring needs to be replaced and issues a maintenance order from Maximo without any human intervention. And the pump could also adjust RPM based on information from a faulty valve. And wouldn't it be nice if a dam, for example, could analyze weather conditions hundreds of miles upstream and make adjustments to the outflows to that facility well before any water arrives, and that adjustment could then mitigate downstream flooding conditions. And we'd want to do that in a completely automated way. We think that's possible. We can start making the inanimate objects around us smarter, just like the cars that know when you're drifting from the lane or brake to avoid a collision. I attended a lecture recently where the speaker talked about being on the brink of making machines smarter than humans. I know that's the basic storyline in many movies, and most of them have a bad ending. The IBM Watson computer that we've heard so much about here this week, in 2011 played and won at Jeopardy. That's one example of machines that are learning and able to transmit that into a way that's never been seen before. In 2013, IBM announced that the Watson system would be installed for the first time for oncology decisions related to cancer treatment at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. In the end for us, the goal is to capitalize on the strengths of the software and the tools we already have, to learn the ones we don't know, and to rely on the computers to do what they do best, and that's to compare millions of options and recommend to us what the best options are. We will create self-aware objects which understand and interact with their surroundings in a way that is unprecedented in human history. In the 1960s, I grew up watching Star Trek. And as a child, I imagined what the world would be like with the Star Trek Enterprise's futuristic technology. It was really all so fantastic back then that we never dreamed that it would come to fruition. If you watch one of those old episodes today, and look at how futuristic you think that technology is by today's standards, you may find that it isn't so far-fetched. The reusable shuttles that could fly to and from space, communicators that look remarkably like old flip phones, those are things that are no longer fantasy, but are recorded in our history as reality. For the Bureau of Reclamation, we think the future of technology is much less improbable as well. Things won't go smoothly. We will struggle, we'll falter, and we will learn from our mistakes. But we will succeed in the end. And either way, it's all really just early attempts at success. Thank you.